Hey y'all, it's Ryan. The last few weekends here have been beautiful with lots of sunshine, and it's not too crazy hot and humid yet. So we've been able to walk around the pond that's in our neighborhood and really see all the flowers and the butterflies. And it made me start thinking about cute little animals that would build a nest and live right there next to the pond. So today we are going to draw this cute little hedgehog in his nest. So grab your drawing tools and let's get to it. The setup that I'm going to use for our cute little hedgehog is going to be 3000 by 3000 pixels, and the DPI is set at 300. That way, if you want to print this out whenever you're done, it's going to print out really crisp and sharp looking. So I'm first going to turn off all of my layers, change my background color to white just to start with, and then come into my actions, make sure I have it set on canvas, and turn on my drawing guide. So for our cute little hedgehog drawing that we're going to do, I'm going to start by just drawing an arch to form the top of the rounded nest that he's going to be in. So over here to the lower left of my canvas, I'm just going to draw that arch up and over, and then I'm going to hold my pen so it snaps to for me. Okay, and then I am going to connect this down at the bottom. Okay, next I'm going to add in kind of a random squiggled cutout of where he's going to be peeking through from his nest. It doesn't have to be perfect because hedgehogs are not looking for perfect or beautiful whenever they are building these nests. They are really just throwing leaves together and grass to build a nice little home for them. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Jagged lines are good and are welcome in this drawing. Next up in my sketch, I'm going to add my cute little hedgehog right here on the side. And actually, now that I see this, I want to bring the opening of his nest down a little bit, because I do want him sitting kind of, and you're just gonna see his face right here and a little bit of his body poking out. So for his body, I'm gonna start in the middle, kind of off to my right. I'm gonna start by going down and then swooping out to make his cheek, or where his little face would be, and then bring it around. And then I can start working on his cute little spikes. So just doing an arch down into my left and then back up into my right. And I'm just going to keep doing that around until I get his cute little first layer of spikes that we're gonna see around his face drawn in. Okay, so then I'm going to draw where his eyes are going to be real quick, just so I can get a better idea of what his little face is going to look like. And a rounded triangle for his cute little nose. So next I'm going to add in the spikes that you would see behind. And they're going to continue. I'm going to fill this right here with that color that I use. So again, just kind of making those spikes around They don't have to be perfect, and they don't all have to be the same size. And then I'm actually going to have them go off and out to the side, so this is the rest of his body in this little area. Now I'm going to add in his cute little ears. Okay. I also want to add leaves around the outside of it and some really pretty flowers, just to show that he's pulled in the nature and what he's found around him into his little nest. So I'm just going to draw a curved line out to the side, hold until it snaps, and then draw a second one coming back in. And I'm just going to draw leaf shapes around in kind of random spots on his nest. Let's see. I'm going to draw some leaves right here at the front as well. And this will end up kind of looking like a flower because of the shape that I'm making. However, whenever we come in with color, I'll use all greens to make it really obvious that these are leaves that he's just added kind of here to the front. I also want to put, like I said, some thistle. So thistle is a U-shaped flower that's going to have these kind of wispy, spiky petals on it. And then at the bottom, it's another little U shape that connects to the stem. Now I'm gonna put this behind his nest so you won't actually see the stem. But I do want two of these, so I'm gonna put one on my left-hand side and then one over here on the right. Let's say right about here. So again, just a U. And then because this is my sketch, I'm not getting overly detailed, not worrying too much about details. And I can come back in and make that bigger. I want to add the leaf for this thistle off to the side, because again, it'll just add the idea that he has just gathered what's around him to build his little nest. So next we're going to start building in our color. In my layers, I'm going to turn my blending mode to multiply. I'm going to turn that opacity down, and then I'm going to build my color in between my sketch or below my sketch and then the group of the actual finished hedgehog that we started with. So I'm going to start by adding a new layer. In my color palette, I'm going to start with this light green. The brush I'm going to use is going to be my dry ink brush, just because I like the texture that it gives. So I'm just going to start by, that's too big, let's turn the opacity up, and then I'm going to turn it down to about 30. Let's see how that works. That's a little better. Go. Okay. So I'm going to drop in and add that color fill. And I am sliding all the way to the right so I can try and get rid of the outline that I see from where I drew the outline and then I filled it in. didn't get it all the way, so I'm just gonna come back in and color it just to make sure that you don't see that clear division. Okay. So now I'm going to start building in the texture and some color into the actual nest. So in my layers, I'm going to click the plus sign to add a new layer, tap the layer to make it a clipping mask, and then in my brushes, I'm going to come into, sketching and select Artist Crayon. I like the texture that it gives, and make sure the opacity, let's start at 100, and then I'm going to come down in my color palette to this a little bit duller green. Bump that size up to 15, and I am just going to lightly come in and draw that the arches, so it gives it that movement to the nest, to the dome, and it's not just a plain image. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to come into my color palette and add this darker green to it now. Again, just to provide a little bit of that movement, make it a little bit interesting, a little more interesting to look at. It's not all one flat color. There's texture to it now and different colors all throughout. All right. So now I'm going to work on the opening of the nest. So my layers, add a new layer. I'm going to go back to my dry ink brush, and then in my color palette I'm going to select this. It's a brown, but it has a lot of red in it. Now this is on top of my nest because it needs to be, but I also need to be mindful that I don't come out too far here. I do need to cover up the green that's down here at the bottom. I'm just going to start tracing over the line that I made for his nest, remembering that I changed up where I had it end or close over here at the bottom. Okay, and then coming along the bottom to close that shape. So now let's try color dropping, making sure that's completely filled in. Okay. So next we're going to start working on our cute little hedgehog who's peeking out. So in my layers, tap to add a new layer. In my color palette, I'm going to go with this very light tan, and this is going to be for his face and these front or the top little spikes that are on his head. So still using my dry ink brush, I'm actually going to lower that brush size. Let's set it to 12. Go. Now because I have him resting on the ground here, and we'll color that in the background, I'm going to come over the bottom of the opening of the nest. Go. And then round it back up. Again with his cute little spikes. Now about in the middle is when I start to push them the other way or send them the other way, much like hair. Okay, drag to fill. And then I'm going to add in the spikes in the background. So that will need to be between the nest opening layer and the layer that we just created because it needs to be behind this one. And then in my color palette, I'm gonna go to this darker tan color. It has a little bit more orange to it. And I'm just going to come over and go over those spikes that I added for his body. And the same, when I hit the middle, I start turning them the other way. Okay. So the rest of this is going to be his body. So I do need to make sure that I close that in. So that I can color fill that area. I'm going to put his ears on a different layer because I'm going to come in and add that detail of the pink to the inside of his ears. So I'm going to click the plus sign. I'm going to go back to that dark brown that I used for the inside of his nest, and I'm going to hold to get my color dropper. Uh-oh. There we go. Hold to get my color dropper, and then draw in his ears. Okay. Next, I'm going to add his eyes and his nose. So I'm going to add a new layer on top of his face. For his eyes, I'm just going to do black, still using my dry ink brush. Color fill. And then his nose, I'm going to outline it in the dark brown, and then I'll fill it with a light pink. Okay, and then this light peach right here in my color palette, I'm going to drag that in. On his eyes, I do like to add that reflection in it with white, just to make them look more alive. There we go. All right, so I'm going to add in the plants around the nest next, and then come in and add more of the details to the flowers and finish up adding details on his face and his ears. So a lot of these plants are going to be behind the nest, so I need to put my layer below that nest layer here. In my color palette, I'm going to select this very dark green, and I'm just going to go over my leaves, making sure that I close them so I can go back in and do a color drop later. And then I'm going to work on my thistle. Now this group of leaves is going to be on top of the nest, so I'm not going to trace or draw on those just yet. So I want to make sure all of my leaves are closed. It's not. Go. So I just need to come back in and close this one. There we go. And I'm going to come in and do my thistle on a different layer. So add. I'm going to start with the bottom of the thistle, which is this lower green part right here, kind of the bulb where it sits. And then I'm going to add my petals going up and around. So for the petals, I start with this dark purple color. And I'm still using, I'm gonna switch to that 6B pencil first. And I'm going to, let's turn it down to 20. I'm going to just simply draw in the beginnings of the petals, and it's just literally drawing lines straight up and then at an angle. Okay. Now I'm going to create a second layer underneath this one so that I can really focus on adding in the big, longer petals with this lighter pink color. I am going to use a different brush, and it is this sable brush found in the organic brush set. And I am just going to, turn that down. Let's go to 25, opacity at 100. And I am just going to draw those petals coming up and out, much like I did with my dark purple here. I'm going to come back in with that dark purple on this layer. I'm going to turn the opacity down to about 50. And then I'm going to blend these together so it's not such a hard change between my dark purple and my light purple. So get my blend, my smudge, make sure it's set on that sable, and just kind of blend these together just a little bit. Now I'm going to change my brush back to my 6B pencil, sticking with, let's go back to that lighter pink, and I am going to draw petals coming up a little bit taller than the rest. And then I'm going to add, using this light yellow, up that way down, little dots at the ends of some of my petals, because that's what you'll see on this one. Okay. Now that I have this one done and I like how it looks, I'm actually going to come into my layers. I'm going to smush those two together. I'm going to merge them by pinching them. Swipe to the left and duplicate. Select the one I duplicated, flip horizontal, and I'm going to move that over here to now my left or my right side of my canvas. So now that I've duplicated them, I actually want to stretch them just a little bit. So I'm going to come into that first one. I'm going to change it to freeform. So that way I can stretch just one aspect of it and it doesn't all move together. So I'm just going to make them a little wider. There's that one. Now let's go to this one. Use my select tool, still on freeform. Okay, so now let's work on our leaves down here in the lower bottom of our drawing. So these need to be on top of the nest. So where my clipping mask is, I'm going to add a new layer on top of it. Come back with my eyedropper and select that dark green. And then start, need to change my brush back to dry ink and start drawing in these leaves. Color fill. Now because of where this is, I'm actually going to move that layer so that it's on top of, so it actually looks like he's sitting behind it. All right, next up we are going to start adding details to our hedgehog and then to our leaves, and then we'll work on the background. So for my details, I'm going to start with my hedgehog, and I'm just going to come in and give him a cute little blush on his cheeks and then add the pink into his ears. So on his face layer, I'm going to come into my color palette, select that little peach again. I'm going to change my brush to the soft airbrush and change the opacity down to about 50. And then I'm just going to lightly color in the smallest amount of, just the tiniest bit of color. And I'm actually going to go back over it just a little bit with that darker pink. So it still shows up, but it has kind of a nice little blur to it because there's two colors built on top of it. Okay, now for the inside of his ears. I'm going to add a clipping mask on this back layer here because I want it to show up behind his ears, but I don't want it to cross over onto his face. So going back to that light pink, still using my soft airbrush, I'm going to set it to about 3, and I'm just going to lightly fill in the inside of his ears. Okay, so now I'm going to add my details onto my leaves. So my bottom layer is where, most of my leaves are. So I'm going to add a new layer, tap it to make it a clipping mask. I'm going to set the blending mode on this to screen. So when I select that dark color, it's automatically going to lighten it up for me. And then I'm going to use this reed pencil in the Procreate brush library. And I am just going to draw kind of that midline, the stem, down the middle of each leaf. And because it's a clipping mask, that's why I start off of my leaf and then end on it, because you won't see it. And then I'm going to add details into my leaves. I'm going to turn my brush size down to about 5. Just adding in some veins to the leaves, that detail. Just to make it look a little bit more interesting and not so flat. Okay, The next detail I'm going to add onto my leaves is actually going to be wherever I did the lines for kind of the veins, I'm going to lighten it up, and then on the opposite side I'm going to make it darker. So again, click the plus sign for a new layer, make it a clipping mask. I'm going to start with the darker side first, so I'm going to change my blend mode to multiply. And then I'm going to change my brush to the Tamar brush right here, which can be found in the painting. I'm going to up the brush size to about 6 and just lightly color in, again on the opposite side of where those lines are. I'm going to come up to my adjustments and add a blur. Let's jump it up to about 4. We're going to add the highlights. So make a new layer, make it a clipping mask, change the blend mode to screen. And then wherever I had the lines, I'm going to color it in lightly on that side. And then again, come into my adjustments and add a blur. Set that to 8. So the last details on leaves that I need to add is going to be to this group down here. And we're going to go through the same process. We just need to locate that layer right here, add a new one. Make it a clipping mask. I'm going to start by going with screen and then changing my pen back to read. And again, this is for the middle of the leaves. Add in my details. And then start working on my shading. So new layer, clipping mask. I'm going to do the darker one first, so multiply. And then set my brush back to Tamar. Okay. Add a new clipping mask. Set it to screen. And then I'm going to blur both of them. Put that at 7 on my screen layer. Come back to my multiply. Set that one to 10. So I'm going to turn off my drawing guide so I get a pretty good idea of what everything looks like. And I'm going to turn off my sketch. So the last detail that I want to add into my actual drawing before working on my background is going to be a highlight here on the side of his nest, just to make it look a little 3D and give it that look to it, that depth. So on this layer of his nest, I'm going to add a new layer, make it a clipping mask, and set it to screen. Using the color dropper, I'm going to select that brown, and I'm going to change my brush to the soft airbrush. Since it's a clipping mask, I'm going to start off
of the layer that I'm working on. And then I am just going to follow the outline of his nest to give it that look of depth. All right. There is one more detail that I forgot until now. I want to come back into his nest and add in lines that show just there are different blades of grass making up this nest. So it's completely smooth. It does have some texture, but this will make it look or appear more so that I have different blades of grass. So I'm gonna go back into my color palette and select this darkest green. I'm gonna go back to my brushes and select Reed. And I am just going to draw, what layer? There, that's the layer I'm on. I need to come down to my nest layer. And now I can draw in, there we go. These just kind of swoosh marks, these arches, very loose, not perfectly placed, not worrying about if they're completely filled in or if it's just a little bit showing there. I'm not going to make them all perfect lines either. Having a little S here and there would help. Again, just adding in that look, that it's not a perfectly round or smooth nest. Right. So before I work on my background, I'm going to group all of the layers for my hedgehog together just to try and keep it a little bit organized. So I'm going to select my top layer that is my hedgehog, swipe to the right on all of the layers below it that go with that drawing, and then click group. So now I know I'm working underneath this group for my background. So I'm going to add a layer below it, come into my color palette, and I'm going to select again this darkest tan. I'm going to add shadows and everything to it, so I'm not worried about where the two colors are going to meet. For this, I'm going to start out with dry ink just to draw in the background, and then I can color fill. And this is where so that's the same color. So I'm gonna add shadows here to make it very obvious that that's two different areas. Next, I'm going to add a clipping mask on top of the sand because I do want to give it some sort of texture. So I'm gonna change my brush to this clay brush, set my blend mode on this clipping mask to multiply. And the brush size I have is about 30. And I am just going to lightly color over that ground layer that I'm building. And I do have it darker on the edges because I'm going to kind of have a gradient going in, and I can smudge to make it lighter. So in my smudge, select that clay, make it a nice large brush, and lightly, because I don't want to lose all of that texture, I just want to bring the color to a more gradient color, a softer transition. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and change my background color to this light blue, so that's basically the sky. And I see this area right here where I need to come back in and add more of that ground. So there we go. That's better. Okay. The last piece I like to add, because this looks like he's in a desert, is I'm actually going to add blades of grass that are wrapping up and around his nest, just to build in that we are out in nature. We're not sitting in a desert with a random hedgehog nest made out of grass. So I'm gonna do this grass in two places. One, I'm going to do it below or behind my base layer that I just added. I'm gonna come in with the darkest green that I have. I'm gonna put my pencil back on reed, and I am just going to draw in grass blades coming in and around. You can vary the size of your brush to make some thicker or bigger. I'm also gonna bring some up and around the back of his nest. That one's too big. There we go, better. And then same on this side. Now, because his nest is made up of this lighter green, I'm gonna come in with the light green and do the same process of adding in just the different color grass blades. Okay. The second place I'm going to add blades of grass like this is actually going to be on top of this layer, so that way it doesn't look like it's barren ground and then grass. It actually blends all together. So click on that clipping mask and add a new layer above it, and just go through the same process that we just went through. I'm going to start with that dark green. And I'm just building the landscape around his nest, really. Okay, and then come back in with that lighter green. Now I can select that top layer, swipe to the right on all of them, and click group. The final step that I'm going to do is to add a shadow underneath where the hedgehog and his nest are, just to create that shadow between the nest and the ground. So in my layers, in between my hedgehog group and my background group, I'm going to click the plus sign to add a new layer. I'm going to select the soft brush and make sure my color is set to black. I do have the opacity set at 50 and my brush size is at 4. Now I am drawing, I usually when doing shadows like this, I actually start on the layer that I know it won't draw on, because I don't want a huge shadow out here. So I'm going to just have a very slight shadow. That comes and stops out to the side. Okay. Now in my adjustments, I'm gonna add a blur to it. Let's make that 8. And then I'm going to turn it down to about 50. So it's just barely there. You can just barely see it, but you do have the distinction between, actually, let's turn that down more. Let's go to 30. So you do have the distinction between where the nest is and where the ground is and the shadow that it's casting. And it's not just one piece.
Thank you so much for drawing with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you're notified when new videos are posted. Hope to see you soon.